What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you with some hoops talk. The usual housekeeping notes before we cannonball in here. Please remember to subscribe wherever you're consuming us. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever. Throw us the permanent subscription if this is your first time here. Ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify help a ton to bring us up the charts. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you're watching us there as well. Like and comment, help the algorithm love us back, and do both. Subscribe to the audio podcast, subscribe on YouTube. If you've done both those things, I would humbly ask that you tell people about us, recommend us, retweet our promos on Twitter, shout us out on Twitter, just shout us out in general. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description. We appreciate any and all shout outs or word of mouth recommendations. Those are what keep Grant and I going at the moment. And follow us on the social channels. We are at HardwoodKnocks on YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter, and we're at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. I believe that is it. So again, join Discord, subscribe, tell people about us. Shout outs are always nice. They help massage our egos, and we really appreciate it, especially when I'm coming at you with an attempt number 2, record a 70+ minute podcast on the Magic and Hawks, only for it to get fucked up because I'm an idiot and I was changing the way I was recording because my internet was fucked up. So went to bed, reset, trying to squeeze it in amid moving and a bunch of other stuff that I have going on. 2, I did a bunch of research, thought about it a lot, and wanted to make sure that the podcast went out. And so we start with, where else? Trae Young. Come on. Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report reports that executives at the G League showcase in Las Vegas are kind of expecting or wondering or bracing for Trae Young to be the next superstar to ask out. Depending on your definition of superstar, do you think that's going to be Levine or Beal in Chicago first? Who knows? This was backed up by Mark Stein, basically, of the Stein line, reporting that the relationship between Trae and head coach Nate McMillan has effectively worsened since the whole miscommunication, I'm using quotes in my hands if anyone's watching, between them about Trae's status for a game a few weeks ago and, recovering from an injury. So if that's worsened, that makes you curious as to what's going to happen. And there's also just the past reporting of, again, we know that him and Nate McMillan clashed, but also, and I can't remember who reported, I'm not sure if it was The Athletic or somewhere else, that if you were to poll people in the Hawks, the players would be more likely to side with Nate McMillan than Trae Young. Amid all this, Travis Schlenk steps down or is promoted into an advisor role, however you want to phrase it. Landry Fields is going to take over as the primary overlord in charge of basketball operations. I think that's just what we should call it at this point. That change is, and let's start with the Trae Young stuff. I'm going to get into trade destinations if you're here for that, and I will clip it and post a separate video of it as well for people who just want the Trae Young destinations on YouTube. But I would be floored if there's a Trae Young trade mid-season. He has 4 years and $178.1 million left on his deal. The final year of that is an early termination option, so that's still 3 years under team control. We did just see Utah move Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert when they had a ton of time left on their contracts. That was still a decision they made over the offseason. And so for this to happen mid-season, he would have to go full-blown Anthony Davis circa 2019, and that didn't even work out. But you would have to really push for a trade demand. Maybe one comes, but the Hawks they feel like they're in dire straits, even though as I record this, they're at 500, which they clearly expected to be better. And you look inward or outward for solutions to figure out whether you can fix this first, since you already doubled down on it. You have some picks headed out to San Antonio at beginning in 2025. You have Murray coming up on free agency after next season. What are you even looking for in a Trae Young trade at that point? So we will get into that, but can the Hawks fix themselves this season? The answer to that is I don't know. And I think you look at them, they've underachieved on offense. If you want to say that Nate McMillan should be fired, that he should have been more creative with some of the bench lineups or rotations in general, I kind of get that going back and looking at some of the lineups that they've used. They've also been really banged up this year. I will say, under no circumstance should this team be in the bottom 5, both 3-point attempt rate and 3-point percentage. Trae is a part of the 3-point percentage. He is shooting under 30%. Or about 30% on his pull-up threes. He's at under 34% on his catch-and-shoot threes. The fit with Murray has not been super clean. There are lineups, like their expected starting 5 this season has actually played pretty well when they've been available. But it doesn't even feel like your turn, my turn, so much as trying to fit like 2 round pegs in the same square hole or at times. And you can see the vision of it when it actually is working, but it's never felt like it's clicked. And that's to be expected to some extent. They were in their first season together. We are 32 games deep into a season for them that they have not played in every game together. And so I get that there's the functional awkwardness there. And also Trae Young's volume off the ball, we've seen him use more off the ball, but it hasn't like skyrocketed. Catch and shoot attempts still only account for like 7% of his total field goal looks, and so that's not this huge number. And it makes you wonder, are things a little bit too cramped for Atlanta when you're looking at these 2.5 court? I would say yes, because of how much they're relying on the mid range, which it makes sense when you look at Trae's in between game, when you look at where DeJounte Murray's been strongest. He has hit his threes at a good clip this season, but you need to open things up probably a little bit more to have more diversification when you're looking at guys who can put the ball in their hands, but also just opening up with your shooting. John Collins comes back from injury. He's been shooting 12.5% from three ever since. That's the name that I think you circle on this team. You wonder, okay, well, what's happening here? He has 3 years and like 78 million, whatever it is, left on his contract. That seems like it's viewed around the league as a net negative now, just based off the rumors. Stein did report also that the Hawks are reinvigorated to move him, whatever the hell that means. I don't know what they get for him at this point. I would give up more for John Collins. I think most would, because I'm a big believer. I don't even think he needs to be used as the primary screener, but you can't marginalize him to the point where you're not even going to test his floor game. You're not going to use him a ton as a screener. And he's someone who, if his 3-point shot's not going to fall, that could be on him. Is he just bystander duty not suiting him? I still think he could help teams. I don't know what they give up for him at this point. If you're Atlanta, are you just interested in a salary dump at this point where you get expiring contracts back? In which case, Kuzma Barton for Collins, is that something Washington looks at with Kuzma going into free agency? Is Collins really addition by subtraction, though? I don't think just moving him is addition by subtraction. If you were to move him for just, say, expiring money for players that you're not actually planning on using, I don't think that necessarily helps your team. And so if you're getting someone back like Kyle Kuzma, that could help. And there are teams that I think should go after him that probably wouldn't. I mean, like Toronto could build something interesting. You start with GTJ salary, and that's someone who I think could probably help the Hawks, even if he's a little bit smaller, because you would want them to get like the Harrison Barnes type player they were supposed to get in a Collins trade, which is sort of a big what if instead of making the Kevin Huerter trade, you make the Collins trade and you have Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter instead of John Collins. Does this team look a lot different? I don't know. Barnes started the season pretty roughly, but he is, again, a squeakier clean fit for this team. The Kings are certainly going to be out on Collins now with the way they're playing and just the setup of their roster. Dallas would love to get their hands on him, I would assume, especially with the Maxi Kleba injury, but I wouldn't expect them to give up future first for him, and they don't even have attractive expiring money or any young, like I guess Josh Green or Jaden Harvey. Would they give, they would have to give one of those guys up in this deal just because they're not sending back palatable contracts. They're not giving up Dorian Finney-Smith at this point for John Collins. You could look at Utah. I would just love to see him there because the vibes are great in Utah and the way that they play. You could play him next to Walker Kessler, who's just been an absolute beast this season on defense. Or you can, they've played bigger while spacing the floor out too. You could go Olynyk, Markkanen, and John Collins. I don't know who's a part of that deal. Markkanen would be a great fit for Atlanta, but you would have to give up first round equity in addition to Collins. And I don't think they have enough to do that. Utah would really have to be in love with Collins. The Hawks can trade their first round pick this year, but it gets murky and difficult for them to trade future picks beyond that. So, but if the asking price is just, I don't know, is it Malik Beasley at this point, or are the Jazz even doing that? Malik Beasley and stuff. Kelly Olynyk and Jordan Clarkson was floated, but Jordan Clarkson is in extension talks with Utah right now. I would love to see John Collins in Utah, though. If you keep Larry Markkanen in there, just the vibes are great. Not like a super intuitive basketball fit, I guess, but it would be incredibly fun to watch. And then there's not, Phoenix has been mentioned. I don't know. You can get to the money without trading your core pieces, and maybe they'd be likely to give up a first round pick. But is that where if you're Atlanta, if it's Saric, Jay Crowder, and a first, and then Shamet, and then it's kind of a 3-for-1, or you're throwing smaller salary in there to make it work. Are you doing that? I don't necessarily love the Collins fit in Phoenix. If you think he can lead some bench units with campaign, or that it's really just going to help if you don't expect CP3 to be the scorer that he was long-term, leading into the playoffs, that could certainly help, but you're going to run into some of the same issues where if he's sharing the floor with DeAndre Ayton, which he can do, you're just reliant on him basically being able to hit threes as a bystander. So I don't necessarily love that fit. Other teams that spring to mind, it's like, I will admit that for as much as I love John Collins, he does feel like a very specific fit. I already mentioned Toronto is one of the ones that I would keep coming back to. I don't know who you give up for that specific with Gary Trent Jr. Would Chris Boucher and Gary Trent Jr. Is there something there? Is that too much in Toronto's view? Do they not want John Collins' money? I think that would be Gary Trent Jr. is headed towards free agency. I'm a big fan of Chris Boucher, not hitting his threes right now, but you could technically work him into Atlanta's front court. Clears the runway a little bit from Onyeka Okongwu with John Collins gone, and you could technically play those two together, Boucher and Onyeka off the bench. So you could look at that. Um, I thought about for a minute, and I'm moving on. I just thought about Memphis to have Jared Jackson Jr., John Collins, but you just don't fuck with it with what you're doing in Memphis. I'd love to see him in OKC. They can't get to the money until the start of the offseason. Their third highest paid player is Chet Holmgren at $9.9 million, and they're not moving him. They're not moving Dort. They're not moving Shea to get John Collins. They're not moving Josh Giddey at this point to get John Collins. He would be fun there, though, when they have cap space a little bit to work with. The Spurs taking a flyer, if they wanted him, they probably would have done that in the DeJounte Murray trade, or at least we would have heard him a little bit more linked. Miami could be semi-interesting, and I would assume you get first-round equity out of them. But again, now you're getting into a scenario where it's, okay, they gave us Duncan Robinson and Caleb Martin or Victor Oladipo and picks. Like, is that the return we're okay with? Duncan Robinson could certainly help the three-point volume of this team, but what is he going to do for your defense? Which has, by the way, when you watch the Hawks and they're at 15th dead on per clean the glass in both offensive and defensive efficiency right now, the defense just feels off too. And like they've had some excellent stretches here, but you have to wonder if even during this stretch where they are 5-9 over their last 14 games, like you've gotten a little bit lucky or you've gotten unlucky on opponent 3-point shooting. And so that's like almost a good harbinger. And you look at their indicators for the season, they're not all like just super off. So, but Clint Capella has gone down. And even before Capella went down, it was just like Atlanta felt like they weren't doing enough to get set after they were making their own shots or when they had time to get back. And they're not 22nd in offense. So, excuse me, they are 28th right now in points allowed per possession after a make since the Clint Capella injury. And like, that's just stuff that's low hanging fruit that you should be able to gobble up. And the fact that they've gotten to even league average defensively overall while being around the bottom 5 in foul rate. And then they're also in the bottom 10 of defensive rebounding right now. That's just weird and noisy. And they did force some turnovers. The fact that they don't turn the ball over themselves, that's a form of defense in itself. But like they've gotten lucky on opponent 3-point shooting overall this season, and we're seeing it starting to normalize now. Opponents are under 35% from three this year, under 34% above the break. I don't think Atlanta is doing anything specifically that we go into whether 3-point shooting of opponents is lucky. I tend to subscribe to that theory. And then Atlanta, just overall, their location effective field goal percentage, which is what you would expect other teams to shoot based on where you're allowing shots, is 25th. And so they're not like necessarily allowing the right kind of shots. There's definitely the element of Clint Capella helping there. At the same time, they are 28th in the share of rim attempts that opponents take. That's really disastrous. They do a good job limiting 3-pointers overall. And I think when you have the aggression of DeJounte Murray, if DeAndre Hunter's healthy, that can be part of it. But I look at this team and think, what is it they need to target to turn around their season? And it's a combination of, I guess, 3-point volume. And I'm boiling it down, simplifying it down, of, if you want to call it, shooting, and better shooting from Trae Young specifically, and then just diversifying their front court rotation to where you're not relying on John Collins, who is at best a combo big or just a one-position player if you consider him a 4. You need combo wings, combo forwards. And how do you go out and get someone like that? Jay Crowder would help, but is Jay Crowder the answer? I mean, his 3-point volume would certainly juice up the offense, and he's confident in his kind of own floater, but he's not going to solve everything there. And he's been a touch and go 3-pointer historically when you look at it. Could you look at getting PJ Washington doesn't move the needle here for me, even a Kelly Oubre Jr. of Charlotte selling. And that's kind of the other issue here is there aren't a lot of sellers right now. We know that there's Houston. We know that there's San Antonio. And that's like kind of it if you think about it. Like Detroit could be a seller with Bojan Bogdanovic, but they're saying they might want to keep him. We thought Indy was going to be a seller. That's not guaranteed. They're better than expected. Maybe they just extend Miles Turner. It seems like Buddy Hield's been good for them, and you're not a team that's you can't make moves in free agency right now anyway. Free agency is just so completely fucked at the moment. When you look at the pool of players, you don't need extra flexibility. And so can you get, would Indy make a move? Yeah, sure. But we look at them, you look at even Orlando, if you were going to paint them as a seller, and it's just kind of like, well, what do they have to sell? Gary Harris hasn't really played. Maybe some team would roll the dice on him. Would they trade Wendell Carter Jr. when he's healthy? I don't know. Like maybe you get Mo Bamba, but that's not helping. None of these players I'm naming really are helping the Hawks when you have Capella there, when you have Onyeka Okongwu. So the dearth of sellers really hurts. And even the Spurs, I thought about like if you're Atlanta, it would have to be a third team. But if you can get Josh Richardson and Doug McDermott, those are two players who help your team. Even Zach Collins, would San Antonio be willing to give him up there, or do they think that he's kind of been better than John Collins to this point? So, but Josh Richardson, Zach Collins, Doug McDermott, are you even able to move John Collins for those players? And is that too low of a return? Again, I have no idea what his value is because I would give up at least one first round pick for him, which is, I guess, good that I'm not in negotiations. Portland, I thought might have been a surprise seller this season, and they've settled into sort of mediocrity, but I don't know that they're just going to make Jeremy Grant available. I guess that he gets an extension before they make a trade. Houston, Eric Gordon and Jayshawn Tate, I would prefer him over KJ Martin, but maybe they don't want to go that route. But with Tari Eason's emergence, could you get Jayshawn Tate out of Houston? I mean, when he's healthy, that's going to help your defense, not your 3-point volume. Eric Gordon will help with that. He is still one of the best long distance 3-point shooters, by the way. He's like fourth in makes outside of 28 feet. So he's pulled back, but he's still really good. John Collins in Brooklyn, the Joe Harris stuff, I wouldn't mind it for the Hawks. I would question it for the Nets. He can work with Ben Simmons. He can work with Nick Claxton, but you're not having all three of those guys close games. And I'm not even sure that you want John Collins and Nick Claxton closing games. And so could that be sort of awkward there? But again, I don't know which team is going to trade for him and also give Atlanta players that immediately helped him. I'm looking at, let's even stretch the scope. A Doug McDermott, Josh Richardson trade feels like the baseline of something that would really help. Or Eric Gordon, Jayshawn Tate is something that could really move the needle for them. They need to go out there and find it, though, because I don't look at this roster and think that it's going to settle itself from within. The Trae Young stuff, he is going to get better. I don't think his efficiency is going to be in the toilet forever. He is still really good. By the way, he's first in assists thrown at the rim, remains one of the better passers in the game. What I will say, and what's interesting, is that it does seem like his play style grates on his teammates, just based off reports, than we've really even heard with a James Harden or Luka Doncic. We've run into issues with both players. Did Jalen Brunson leave Dallas in part because of Luka Doncic? It's possible. Did Kristaps Porzingis? I don't really like it's Kristaps Porzingis having a great year, maybe a fringe all-star, but okay. You've seen Harden butt heads with Chris Paul. It didn't necessarily work out with Russell Westbrook, but like you have Daryl Morey continuously trying to trade for him. PJ Tucker goes back to play with Harden in Philly, out of his way to go there, by the way. So it just feels like with the locker room stuff and the clashing with coaches that and I know Luka clashed with Rick Carlisle, so I'm not trying to put all this on Trae Young. It does just feel like there is something weird there. The whole report about if you polled players in the locker room, they would side with Nate McMillan over Trae Young. It's a little unsettling. You would get rid of Nate McMillan before you get rid of Trae Young, though. I think that's pretty clear. I do also wonder, though, now that Landry Fields is in charge, how much was he aligned with Travis Schlenk? How much of a say did he have in the first place? Could he decide to take the roster in a different direction? Is he more just motivated to move Collins for whatever, to maybe trying to open up the rotation and force McMillan to attempt different things? Or is he maybe more open to starting over because this is kind of like, oh, I want to leave my mark. He's been there for a while, so I want to make that clear. But if he wants to make his mark, lead into a new era or rebuild, would he even consider a Trae Young trade in the offseason? Is he just more likely to do that than Travis Schlenk is, in my point? Schlenk is the one who made the trade to get Trae Young in the first place, which is they should have flat out. You should have went with Luka Doncic, but it hasn't turned out to be like this catastrophic deal because of how good that Trae Young actually is at his peak. And those are factors that come into play with all this too. And it's a tough situation to read. You would have ideally liked to, I know Schlenk had some, it's been cited there are personal things going on in his life. Hopefully everything is fine there. This is ideally, I would think, something, if you're going to what feels like a regime shift, let's not even call it a change. You probably would have wanted that over the offseason before you go through the draft, even though AJ Griffin looks like he's going to pan out. Before you go through free agency, the DeJounte Murray trade extending DeAndre Hunter, you would want your primary executive to still be in place after making those decisions, ideally. But now it could be up to Landry Shields maybe to decide what's happening with the coach and Trae Young. I will say these are moves that get made over the offseason, though, if you're going to move Trae Young. And I think he's really going to have to push for it because you don't just get one of the, what could be in any given season, one of the 10 to 15 best players in basketball, all NBA type player in his age 24 season and just move on when you also have him under team control for 3 more years. Now, the Trae Young trade specifically, and we had a question from Rome 8180 about this, with the rumor mill that Trae will be the next player to ask out, which teams should actually consider trading for him, and what's a reasonable amount to give up. He's a tough fit in a lot of ways, in my opinion. He can't play off the ball, is possibly the worst defender in the NBA, doesn't seem to get along with teammates and coaches. I've actually defended his game in the past. I don't think you average 30 and 10 without being a great player, but this year has really soured me on him. I get all that. I still think there's it's almost TBD on whether he can play off the ball, but I get all of those concerns. Let's start with the asking price, and that's going to be up to Atlanta. If you're moving Trae Young, I think the reflexive response is to believe, oh, we're going into a rebuild. I don't know if that's guaranteed. They might look at this roster and say, well, why don't we recalibrate it around DeJounte Murray? But he's also, if you were going to rebuild, he's going to be a free agent in 24. It would make sense to just trade everybody, recoup a bunch of picks, and start over from there. Again, that gets a little easier to do over the offseason when there are teams that are more flexible. I don't know what call they make. And so it depends on that. If I'm Atlanta and I'm looking to rebuild, you do what Utah did when they traded Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. You can go the route of, well, we kind of want a young centerpiece involved, but we'll take all the picks and then either useful players or just players who are there for salary matching. And that's important. Malik Beasley's played really well this season. Walker Kessler's been great. Jared Vanderbilt has given them some really good minutes. Kelly Olynyk's been really good. Colin Sexton's been really good. They didn't make the trade with any of those players in mind as centerpieces. Walker Kessler was kind of like an extra first-round add-on. They did it for the picks, for the control of these drafts into the long-term future. That's what you do if you're not concerned with the present. It just so happened they got maybe an all-star this year and Larry Marketing too. If you're Atlanta, you could look at Mitchell and Gobert and say, I want something similar. Mitchell's been the better player this year. Trae would have been identified as the better player leading into the season. I think you ask for a similar haul. Now, if you're looking to just recalibrate the roster around DeJounte Murray, that's probably going to eat into your pick equity, where you're looking at teams to send you an impact player or two so that you can continue contending for 10th in the East or whatever, or thinking that you have a pathway to getting better. It doesn't complicate the trade, but it would open up suitors to maybe where if they're not super pick rich, it would allow them to join the sweepstakes, but then it would also hurt a team. Like let's say Dallas. Dallas would be just objectively funny to see Trae and Luka on the same team, but they could, after this season, feasibly offer after this season, assuming their first round pick to the Knicks conveys, they could offer a 2024 first, a 2026 first, a 2028 first, and then a 2030 first. We're talking about trading Trae Young for them when the league calendar resets. 4 picks plus 3 swaps. That is the meat and the potatoes and the dessert of their trade. They would be including salary matching after that. Maybe Josh Green and Jaden Hardy are in there, but that's the meat and potatoes of their deal, or all those picks. They immediately get bounced from the running if the Hawks want more established impact players. And so looking at these destinations, I thought about this a lot, and I didn't anticipate talking about this team in the first place, but I did on the first iteration of this podcast. Would Boston give up Jaylen Brown for Trae Young? Is that something they would consider? I don't know. If Atlanta was confident they could re-sign Jaylen Brown, I think that's something they would be interested in, pairing him with DeJounte Murray and Clint Capella and Bogdan Bogdanovic. I could see it. Boston, they had an historically great start to the season offensively this year, and Brown has been great, like caps lock great. But if the offense continues to fall off, or if they think they need more of a caps lock shot creator and someone to drive even the playmaking of an offense in a playoff final situation, and they don't believe that's Jason Tatum, would they consider it? I wouldn't at this point. I want to make it clear. If the season ended in less than palatable fashion for Boston, I'm saying, let's say they miss the conference finals and it's not even pretty. I wouldn't predict that, but maybe that's when they enter the fold. Brooklyn just doesn't have the juice to get him, and I don't think they need him. Charlotte really doesn't have the juice to get him, which is unfortunate because they're fucking terrible. I don't know why you'd want to pair him with LaMelo anyway. Chicago, I guess if Atlanta really liked something built around Zach LaVine and Patrick Williams and stuff, but at that point, if you're Chicago, what you're pairing Trae Young with DeMar DeRozan and then re-signing Vooch, and like that's your team moving forward. So no, Cleveland definitely doesn't need him. I mentioned Dallas again. They could trade when the league calendar sets 4 first-round picks, presumably in 3 swaps. That's to get your attention a little bit. If you're Atlanta, the absence of oh, we're getting back other good players in the process that we really like. Do you want Kleba at that point when he's coming back from injury, which it sounds like based on the surgery timeline, he's probably not going to be back until May, which could be the end of the year. Would they give up Dorian Finney-Smith and all those picks? I think you need Dorian Finney-Smith to kind of insulate Trae and Luka even defensively. But if you're going the picks route, yeah, Dallas gets involved. Denver is an interesting thought exercise depending on how this season ends. Could you build something around Jamal Murray? I wouldn't. The two-man game between Jokic and Jamal Murray is just divine. And so don't take the ball out of Jokic's hands when you have someone in Murray who you know can work off him. Detroit, if they put Jaden Ivey on the table, they just don't have enough extra picks. And it's like, that would be they would have to go Jaden Ivey and picks, and that would be the full-blown rebuilding mode move for the Hawks. And I don't know that you think you're good enough and even have the sample size with Cade Cunningham, who's going to be out for the year himself, to be like, oh, we're that good. Let's push our chips all in on what we don't know is even like any pairing when you're getting a megastar could technically be combustible. You feel more confident making it. Let's say if you're Cleveland and you're coming off a standout year and your process has been accelerated, Detroit's has not. Golden State, I thought about because, look, at the end of the season, Jordan Poole's new money kicks in, build something around Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, and future picks beginning in 2026 and later. Does that catch Atlanta's eye? And you might just say, well, why would you have Trae and Steph play together? I will say yes, but Steph can play off anyone. And how much worse is Trae defensively than Jordan Poole? I mean, size-wise, Jordan Poole is going to be bigger. So there's that. But I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate it if that's the move for Golden State. I would be interested to see it. They wouldn't be one of my favorite destinations. Houston, semi-interesting, but like, what are you giving up? You have all these future picks, hodgepodge of players that you could send out, but are you saying, okay, Jabari Smith Jr. and Jalen Green are untouchable in this, or you want to give up one of those guys for Trae Young? And if you don't have to give one of them up, how many picks is this costing you? And then Trae Young, Jabari Smith Jr., and Jalen Green, it just feels like you're trying to push your timeline too quickly in that regard. And it could end up blowing up in your face where by the time maybe you are ready to win, Trae has eyes for another team. But they have the equity to get involved. And if you're able to keep two of Eason, Green, and Jabari Smith Jr. and move, and I guess Şengün, if you want to throw it that way, the Şengün Trae Young defensive lineups would be horrific. But maybe, but I don't know. They could certainly use someone to drive the offense as a point guard, and I don't think that's KPJ or Jalen Green, but can Jalen Green can work off Trae Young, but do you want to bring in someone so ball dominant when you haven't fully explored, when you're probably not even maximizing Şengün as it is, and when you haven't fully explored Jabari Smith's offensive game? Indiana's a no with Halliburton. The Clippers just don't have the equity. The Lakers, they have, after this season, they can offer some picks that go out a little bit further, but 2 picks and 3 swaps, let's say, what they could get to, plus they'll have cap space, so like, and a small salary. It's not happening, Lakers fans. Trae could ask for a trade to the Lakers. It's not happening. Memphis with Jaws, a no. Miami, I initially thought was a no, but Bam and Jimmy Butler with Trae. So he's insulated defensively there. And then they have Jovic. And after this season, it gets interesting with the picks that they could offer. I mean, it's kind of interesting now, but they owe that 2025 first to OKC. Let's just say they can unprotect that, and OKC is willing to work with them. You can offer after the draft. So you would offer the 2023 player that you actually draft, a 2024 swap, a 2026 swap, a 2027 pick, a 2028 swap, a 2029 pick, and a 2030 swap. And so you can effectively offer, if we're just going to include the 2023 pick in here, but you're moving it again once the calendar resets, you can trade 3 first-round picks and 4 swaps. You have Jovic then, and you have Tyler Hero. Is there a deal there to be made? Even if you think that I'm wrong about the pick numbers, but 23, 27, and 29 is 3. You can swap in 24, 26, 28, and 2030. Again, once the league calendar resets. So 3 picks, 4 swaps, Tyler Hero's $27 million salary next season to play around with. Does that, I mean, if you're given the full pick vote, I'm probably trying to get Duncan Robinson off that deal. So you get to keep Kyle Lowry with Trae Young. You can also use Kyle Lowry as the primary salary ballast there. Does Atlanta think he'll stay for a year and that he kind of helps them remain competitive? They could look at it that way. But I wouldn't mind playing Lowry with Trae Young. It's an undersized backcourt, but I think it could work. So you also, if you need to get to the rest of the money to bring in Trae Young's salary, there's Duncan Robinson we talked about. Dwayne Dedman, you could throw that in there, or maybe even Caleb Martin's on the table. That's a player who's just super useful. I Miami feels like a Trae Young sleeper. I'm not gonna lie. Maybe they're more obvious to some people than me, but that's the team that I'm almost in love with now. The idea of it. Let's see, would Trae clash with Jimmy Butler, who needs the ball in his hands, and Bam, who's been a monster this season? The Heat are very malleable, and so are their stars: Butler, Lowry, Bam Adebayo. I just wouldn't rule it out. Milwaukee's a no. Minnesota, people have talked about the Karl-Anthony Towns for Trae Young challenge trade. I don't know if Atlanta does that because then you're recalibrating your team around Capella and Cat and DeJounte Murray. I'm assuming you trade John Collins as part of that deal. You would have to make more moves in the front court, and Minnesota is not going to have extra picks to give you. If they were willing to give you Jaden McDaniels, like maybe that makes it more palatable, but I do think Trae has exponentially more value than Karl-Anthony Towns, who cannot be moved till this summer, by the way. The Pelicans, no, I don't want to see them invest in a point guard who's not, if it was an A+++ defender point guard, but you have Zion and CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram. I just don't think you need to go that route. The Knicks, yeah, they'd be involved. I've wondered whether their assets are sexy enough. The conditional first round picks from Detroit and Washington, I think, sound better in theory than practice. They've also, look, IQ's playing really well right now. I think OB before his injury, and he was going through kind of a rough patch, but he showed that he could hit the three ball. Those guys are approaching extension eligibility, and that's going to make them less valuable to their new teams. RJ Barrett, is he more valuable on his new deal to a team like the Hawks? That would be the big one here. I think RJ Barrett or Quentin Grimes are your single most valuable trade assets still if you're going the megastar route. I don't know the answer to who it is, to be honest. Quentin Grimes has 2 years left on his rookie scale and might have some off the bounce stuff in addition to hellacious defense. Deuce McBride, not in this conversation, but he's definitely upped his trade value based off what he's done since getting some more playing time. I think the big factor here would be, aside from the Hawks' direction, because the matching money going out, if it's RJ Barrett, it really does help you. So how many picks would you be willing to attach to him if you're the Knicks? I mean, if it's not RJ Barrett, like you're really going the super duper pick route with just some of your prospects, and you weren't willing to do that for Donovan Mitchell, who's a cleaner fit next to Jalen Brunson than Trae Young. Would Jalen Brunson be a part of that trade? How much does that impact the pick equity that you're sending out? It depends on Atlanta's aim. I think the biggest question, though, is how does Atlanta view the Knicks picks? And with the Donovan Mitchell trade, it was said, well, get the distant Knicks picks. You should short the Knicks future. That's always been the smart play. When you look at where they're at now, they're not going to get worse with Trae Young. And I think there were more questions about this roster because of what happened last season, even after acquiring Jalen Brunson, than there are now after seeing it in practice, seeing them lean into more playing time for the guys that should be playing, getting away from Fournier, getting away from Rose, et cetera, et cetera. Even experimenting with the Jericho Sims, Julius Randle, Isaiah Hartenstein front court. I don't know why you would believe that their picks are going to suck when they're getting Trae Young. And if they get to keep, because they're not giving up both, if they have Jalen Brunson and or RJ Barrett still there after the fact, I don't know that their distant picks are going to seem as valuable as they might for other teams. Maybe it's just because they're the Knicks and they're viewed as combustible on the outside. I think they would be in this trade. I think the cost of getting Trae Young, unless Atlanta is in love with RJ Barrett, might be higher than people are expecting, because the Knicks, and this is a compliment, I do think their future first round equity has almost declined in value a little bit. Their own picks is what I'm saying. Perhaps I'm wrong there. OKC, one of my favorites here for that. They can't do anything until the summer when they have cap space, just because they're not, if they really wanted to, yeah, you go Lou Dort, Chet Holmgren right now. You're not doing that. You're not trading Chet or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You make them off limits in a Trae Young trade. Otherwise, I don't really know what the appeal would be. Do you make Lou Dort off limits? I think Atlanta's going to want him, and I don't think you should rule it out. I think Trae would be very insulated defensively long-term here between the way that Shai's played this season. Lou Dort could still be here. Chet Holmgren coming back. Is Josh Giddey still around? I think he's probably your primary. He's played well this season, and he's played better off of Shai and has made me appreciate his game more. I thought he was a very inflexible player looking at his offense, so he's impressed me there. But Ousmane Dieng, J-Dub, even Jeremiah Robinson Earl, even Pokusevski, if they keep him, they have a lot of disruptive defenders or defensive projects. I think J-Dub is going to wind up being an incredible defender by next season. Even Ousmane Dieng, rest in peace to his wrists. I mean, he didn't lose his wrist, but could we get him some sturdier wrist there, please? So you could very much inoculate Trae defensively. You have all these picks. If Atlanta's looking to go the rebuilding route, I think OKC makes a lot of sense. And you start with Giddey and you flesh it out from there, because you could go with the cap space they have, Giddey, a couple small salaries, and you're there. Now, does Atlanta want Lou Dort? That's a different discussion. I think that impacts the pick equity you're giving up, but they would be a fun destination. Orlando is a team that people have mentioned, and I think it makes sense. What are you giving up? Who's untouchable? Paolo Banchero, and are you putting Franz Wagner off limits in that deal? I probably would, just because of the picks that it's going to cost me. I want Trae coming in and playing with Paolo and Franz Wagner. Jalen Suggs is not off the table. The question becomes, how much is Jalen Suggs worth in this trade? And the answer is, I don't know. I view Jalen Suggs before his injury. You want to monitor the ankle. I felt like people were too low on him still, but he's going to be viewed, I would argue, highly internally throughout Orlando in trade talks, but not if you're a team like Atlanta. What does it cost if you're going the picks, salary, Jalen Suggs, and they could have Chumo KK. They could have, RJ Hant will be off the books by then. You don't quibble over including Cole Anthony if you still have Mo Bamba. Even if they want Wendell Carter Jr., I don't know why they would. He's really good. If they want Markelle Fultz, his salary next year is non-guaranteed. Same with Jonathan Isaac. They could, if you want to make the money work and Atlanta's just looking for flexibility moving forward, Orlando's a good partner. But if Suggs is the primary tangible centerpiece going out, what else is involved? How many picks? You have all your own. So if this year's pick is good, you have that Chicago pick this year. So those two first, if you want to give those up, that might be a good baseline with Jalen Suggs to ensure that you don't have to eat into the Franz Wagner being there, because you're not trading Paolo. I just think that Franz Wagner, who's been really good, is someone Atlanta would push for there. Philadelphia, no. Phoenix, I thought about it because Devin Booker can work off anyone. He's just absolutely spectacular. But would you be willing to say, all right, well, CP3 we think he's done, or we're going to move him in this deal and send him to Atlanta? And then the what if becomes, what if Atlanta drafted CP3, comes to fruition 80 years later? That would be pretty callous of them. They have all their own picks, but you're probably looking at, you need Atlanta to be in love with DeAndre Ayton, which touchy proposition because they have Capella, Onyeka Okongwu, and even John Collins there still. And then are you giving up Mikal Bridges? You can get to the money if you're going to include CP3. But yeah, it would be interesting, I would say. The defense with Booker and Young would be rough, but Booker's improved. And like I said, I don't worry about Booker playing off anyone. Portland's an O with Dame. Sacramento, if you want to build something around De'Aaron Fox, I just don't know. The vibes are good there. I guess if you wanted to level up a little bit, and reunite Trae Young with Kevin Huerter, and you could unprotect the pick that you owe them in 24 to open up your packages. But Sabonis and Trae Young, and then Kevin Huerter still there. You're giving up Keegan Murray in that deal. You're re-signing Harrison Barnes. He's a free agent this summer, so he wouldn't be a part of an offseason trade. I don't know. The Spurs, not really their player, and they're just so early into their rebuild. Toronto, yes. Trae doesn't fit Project 6-9, but if you get to keep Pascal, and then you say, we're keeping one of Anunoby or Scotty Barnes. And then so it's Trae, Anunoby or Scotty Barnes, and Siakam, and you're fleshing out your team from there. And yeah, Fred VanVleet maybe is a part of that deal. It would help the Raptors if it was part of this season, or maybe it's a sign and trade over the summer, because maybe Atlanta wants to remain competitive. Pair him with Murray and Capella and DeAndre Hunter. Like, that's an infrastructure that works. And if you were to make the trade this season, like, you could include Gary Trent Jr. as part of this. I would give up OG or Barnes for Trae. I wouldn't give up both. And so you go one of them. And I think I've changed. I'm not lower on Scotty Barnes long term, but Samson Folk mentioned this on Sam Bassini's podcast at The Athletic. I feel like sometimes we overcomplicate trades for superstars, where if Toronto could have traded Scotty Barnes for Kevin Durant, in hindsight, they should have just done it. I don't believe for a second that it was just the Scotty Barnes hang up, but I would say the same thing here at this point. You can make a case that they're less likely to take that route if it's Trae than it would be Kevin Durant. But I would give up one of Anunoby or Barnes, I think, for Trae Young. And then you have the other one who you don't trade with Siakam. Build out your roster from there. If Precious Achiuwa is probably not part of the package, you're going I would say, salary plus Barnes or Anunoby, and then picks is how you're building out the package. And it would help you even more. I don't know that you have to give up as much if Fred VanVleet is tradable. Like, if they actually want Fred VanVleet, and if Atlanta wants to compete, they might. Trae in Utah, not so much. I think, he'd be an upgrade over Mike Conley or Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton, but are you cashing in your picks for Trae Young? And Atlanta's probably going to want Beasley and or Markin as part of that deal. So that's just a no. Washington will probably fancy themselves Trae Young suitors, but unless they convey that 2023 pick to the Knicks, I don't see them having the juice to to get there. And Trae and Bradley Beal, I think they could work, but I just don't know. I think other packages would be more attractive. My favorites, if you want me to ask for my 5 or 6 favorites, because there are a few that are experimental that I think I'd like, my flat out favorites would be I love Miami. All of a sudden, I talk myself into Miami. I love Toronto. I love OKC. I love Orlando. Those are the 4 that I love and think that they could cobble together. Might be different types of packages, and most of them are better suited over the offseason, except Toronto could offer a better one now. And I also would. Boston's an interesting exercise, not one of my favorites, though. Just Dallas being in on Trae would be hysterical. So I throw those 2 just sort of tangentially into it. And those are just the 6 teams that I sort of eye. And I don't think there's another one that I'm forgetting that I'm in love with. It's really just New York. So, and I would like New York more than Boston just because I don't want to mess with what Boston has. So it would be Dallas and New York is sort of just, they would be in. I don't know if it's the best possible course for either of them. But I would want to see it is my point, even if it's a car crash theory. And just by virtue of what do the Knicks have to pay to get Trae Young, who is hated by the fan base, but will be immediately loved if he's traded there. And then, I mean, if I was going really experimental, Golden State, but New York and Dallas are in the one tier for me. And in the tier of my own of what I just would actually really like to see teams that could go after Trae Young, if you move him, which I don't know the Hawks do, would be Miami, Orlando, OKC, and Toronto.